Hi, my name is Petra and this is my very first fully completed sketchbook. I'll keep this introduction short, just a few words about why I started sketching in sketchbooks. The main reason was to document my progress and journey so I could flip through the pages from time to time and keep everything nicely organized in one place. Originally, I intended to use this sketchbook just for pure watercolor paintings, but even though it's a watercolor sketchbook, I wasn't entirely happy with it. The paper is quite smooth and lacks texture. Still, I managed to finish it, and these are my first steps into urban sketching. It took me a little over a year to fill this sketchbook. After a long break, maybe 12 or 15 years from creating, I decided to return to painting. In the past, I mostly experimented with pure watercolor. When the pandemic hit and I found myself with more free time, I felt inspired to pick up where I'd left off. Actually, these two pages are not in chronological order. I left them blank because, like many others, I was a bit scared to start on the first page. So I came back to fill them in later. This first one was inspired by a Canadian artist named CC, whose YouTube channel I followed. I'll leave a link to her channel in the description below. The second one was actually my daughter's school assignment during pandemic. She was supposed to draw a spring flower, so I joined her and painted something for my sketchbook too. This was a very first painting I did in this sketchbook. I started this as a pure watercolor, but I was pretty disappointed with it. The paper dried too fast and the colors didn't blend the way I expected. Then I tried to add a liner to improve it, but that didn't work out too well. After that, I thought, what if I try using the liner first and then add watercolor? But that didn't turn out so great either. Finally, I decided to try just using pencil and liner. I sketched this using both, and I have to say this paper works really well for that. It's not too rough, so it's great for both mediums. Later on, thanks to the YouTube channel Taria's Sketchy Adventures, I came across a Canadian urban sketcher named Captain Tom, and his work completely captivated me. This is a quick study based on a part of one of his sketches, and I was hooked. That was the moment I realized I love this style and I want to pursue it. I also love the idea on sitting somewhere on location and sketching directly from life. Of course, wanted to do it and actually do it are two different things. At that time, I wasn't ready to sketch outdoors, so I started practicing using photos from my travels. This drawing is based on a photo I had used years ago as a reference during my watercolor beginnings. I wanted to see how it would turn out in my new style using liner and watercolor. And I think I like it better this time. I'll insert somewhere here the original painting for comparison. There was a 12 years gap between the two, during which I didn't draw or paint at all. But then I started thinking, liners have such uniform lines. They don't look like exactly how I wanted them to. So I ordered a pen from China with a bent nib that allows you to create lines of varying thicknesses depending on what angle you hold it. When you draw it in one direction, you get a thick line, in another you get a thin one. but it still wasn't quite what I was looking for. But to be completely honest, I didn't give it much of chance. I used it only for one more drawing like this one, from an old trip to San Francisco. Then I bought the popular Lamy Safari pen, which is very widely available and easy to buy here. It has a classic fine nib. These two sketches were done with Lamy Safari, and to me it looks a bit comic-like. To be fair, the Lamy isn't at all different from liners, since its lines are so quite uniform. Sometimes when I had a bit of space left on a page, I would sketch something small with pencil or liner, like a Statue of Liberty here. This one was also done with Lamy Safari, based on a photo from Venice Beach in Los Angeles. Another sketch from LA. I quite like this one. I like pen work, but don't like watercolor painting. It feels more like coloring book. This one is from a long ago trip to New Zealand. I tried to capture atmospheric perspective here by skipping the ink outline in the background. It didn't quite work out because the distance details ended up more prominent than the foreground ones, and the distant greens are too harsh. This was my first attempt at urban sketching with ink and watercolor. I sat down in my village and tried sketching something on location. It was already late in the day and the sun was behind the buildings, so the whole thing is in the shadow. I still have trouble with that. I prefer the main subjects to be lit from the front or side. But this was my first attempt and I was proud of myself for doing that. I sketched this one on a train to Prague. I didn't dare use watercolors on the train, and later I didn't have time to finish, so it stayed as a simple pen sketch. This was done when my husband had his first glider flight. I sketched this directly at the airfield, I believe with micron pens, and later I added more sketches at home based on photos. I remember this vividly. I spontaneously pulled out my sketchbook one evening when I came home from work earlier, and this is a farm next to our house. I like how I captured atmospheric perspective here, with the background in cooler, lighter, less contrasting tones. I was also pleased with the colors overall. Recently I revisited this subject from slightly different angle. I'll show you the comparison. This new sketch is from my third sketchbook, which is slightly larger. I haven't finished it yet, but hopefully you can see some progress. This one is my least favorite page in this sketchbook. It was another school assignment for my daughter. She had to paint an autumn leaf, so I tried it too, but it got out of hands. But I am happy with this page. It was done with liners and I like the dry brush effect I used here. I still quite like it, this one. Here is another autumn scene I'm not very fond of. The brush strokes are too busy and the colors are too vivid for my opinion. Here's a little trash bin still alive. It has a slightly comic-like feel to it. This is an old walnut tree near my home. I like this tree, and so I tried sketching into different seasons, autumn and winter. I used a really nice color combination here, warm burnt sienna and cool ultramarine for the shadows. I think it turned out quite well, and surprisingly the colors blended nicely on this paper. I remember this one like it was yesterday. I painted it on New Year's Eve. Since I was such a complex scene, I skipped the pencil sketch and went straight in with a pen. Normally I'd sketch everything out first, but I knew this would take forever if I did it twice. So I just went for it. The perspective is a bit off in some places, like this table here, but overall I was proud of how it turned out. Here are two more sketches made from photos. One is an old goat shed nearby, and second one is an extension of the farmhouse I painted earlier. This was part of an Instagram challenge in January called Do It In Your Style. Each week we had to paint a front shop. So these are my attempts. I did most of them straight with a pen without a pencil sketch. This one was inspired by a news story about a Scottish village. Something had happened there, so I looked it up on Google Maps and found this little church, which caught my eye. I sketched it from a street view. Then I had some empty space left on the page, so I quickly added a Scottish thistle with a liner. This is a bit of random spread. I sketched this while waiting for my daughter at an appointment, and this is a view when driving out of our village. This is our old fire station, which no longer exists. The proportions in this sketch are way off. Just look at the size of the cyclist and compare it to the tiny car. It turned out pretty funny. And this is our local town hall. At first I tried finding interesting buildings in my village that represent its character, but since it is such a small place, there are not too many. These are old agriculture buildings from a former collective farm. I really liked how this sketch turned out, the layout on the page and the composition. The colors are a bit washed out because at first I was hesitant to use too much pigment and wasn't sure how the paint would dry. Some of my early sketches are quite light, while others are more saturated, like this one. It's a house near my parents' home, half collapsed and standing only by sheer willpower, but I just love these old buildings. This spread shows a winter panorama of our village featuring the church and rectory. Again, I painted this from a photo because it gets really cold here in February, sometimes below 15, below 20 degrees Celsius. These days are pretty cold too, and I haven't dared to go out sketch yet. And finally, last page, a slightly less scenic spot near my house, basically an illegal junkyard. And that's it. Thank you so much to everyone who watched until the end. If you enjoyed this little tour through my first sketchbook, I'd really appreciate a like or a comment or even a subscription. I am planning to film my next two sketchbooks as well, although I haven't quite finished the last one yet. Sketchbook number 2 is about the same size as this one, but it's from Petra and it has 100% cotton paper, which made painting much easier. So that's coming up next. I'll see you in the next sketchbook tour or maybe in a process video. Thank you for watching.